He's a showboat. He's a grandstander. The FBI has been in turmoil. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that.
Donald Trump on James Comey, proving once again that you've got to be one to know one. You know, it's become popular to talk about the death of journalism, especially print journalism. But hold on, one man has come to the rescue. He's single-handedly been responsible for some of the best political journalism of the past 50 years. And readers are responding by signing up. Just look to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Watching with fascination at the seeming implosion of the Donald Trump presidency, Andrew is here in Toronto, Chantal in Montreal, and Paul Wells, senior writer for Maclean's, is in Ottawa. It's been quite the week on the Comey story. And while it's not our normal turf, like everybody else in this country, or most everybody else, we've been talking about Trump all week. What do you make of this and the story that's unfolding in Washington? Andrew?
Well, just to preface this, of course, we all have a stake in this. The whole world does. The President of the United States is, part of all of our lives and fortunes. Look, Donald Trump has been crossing lines ever since he burst on the scene politically, but he crossed yet another line, and perhaps the most serious one yet this week. If you are under investigation, your administration, several of your closest associates are by the FBI, and you fire the head of the FBI, I don't care what other construction you want to put on it, that is a prima facie case of obstruction of justice. It is, for anybody in a lower situation, it would be grounds for criminal charges, perhaps, and certainly for dismissal. The president's a different kettle of fish. It's innately political. But he has, I think, set off more alarm bells than ever before, because one of the comforting assumptions that a lot of us tried to reassure ourselves with was, well, he's Donald Trump, yes, he's the president, but the United States is a system of checks and balances, and ultimately he'll have to work within that. All of that depends upon the president, in that case, being willing to be so bound. And everything we know about Trump is he observes no boundaries, no norms of any kind, and he's just proven it yet again in the most serious possible way.
Chantal?
What struck me beyond all of that is the disarray that attended to executing this. It's, yes, a very serious business to fire the person who is investigating you, but to not be able to stick to a version, a narrative as to why you do it also shows something about the White House and the dysfunctionality of the place that has to worry anyone that has to deal with that White House. If anyone in this country had tried to do this and then messed up in trying to explain it, and the way that these people have contradicted themselves, you would have thought this is a dead man or a dead woman prime minister walking.
You know, Paul, I don't know about you, but I've had a hard time tearing myself away from the television all week watching this, because, as Chantal says, it just seems to bounce from one excuse to another. None of them seem to work, and he seems to get deeper into the mire of all this. What do you make of it?
Well, so to some extent, almost one of the less important side effects of this has been the shredding of the career of a guy named Rod Rosenstein, who's the Deputy Attorney General, a highly respected attorney whose confirmation by Congress was a slam dunk because on both sides of the aisle, they figured he was a pretty straight-up guy. His justification for this dismissal was a transparent fig leaf, which is the worst kind of fig leaf, and
not a nice picture.
No. And by all accounts, and Lord knows there's plenty of anonymous sources to fuel these accounts, he spent the last 36 hours running around trying to salvage his reputation, trying to get the rest of the White House to communicate his memo the way he wants it. But the upshot is you can't get close to this president and survive intact. And while it's possible to come up with some justification for firing Jim Comey, he was a highly controversial FBI chief. He himself said that his behavior during the election cycle last year caused him a tinge of nausea when he contemplated it. The one guy in the world who shouldn't be firing him is the president he's investigating. I think the one thing we can be sure of is that it will get worse, that this is not the worst day of the Trump presidency, that many worse days lie ahead.
Well, you know, we've seen a lot of worse days already in this presidency, but he always seems to somehow find a way to wiggle out. what about this time? I mean, a week from now, are we going to say, oh, yeah, well, that was last week?
A week from now, to me, he's a bit like a squirrel. He keeps jumping from branch to branch. Someone saws off the branch, he jumps to another one. So a week from now, we may be talking about a very different crisis. Because that has been the pattern. The distraction or diversion has been to jump from one mess to the next mess.
Yeah, but the thing that's been a constant drumbeat all through the last several weeks and months has been this Russia business. Now, nobody can prove anything at this point. It's part of an investigation. It's not, we're not at the stage of laying charges or anything, but it continues. And obviously Trump, so far as he calculated this at all and just didn't react in a fit of pique, must have felt that he could ride out the political and media thunderstorm, whatever the word I'm looking for, the firestorm that would come out of that, that it'd be worse if the investigation actually made any headway. But the investigation will be knocked back by this, there's no doubt. And they've, to be fair to them, they've now freely confessed, or not freely confessed, but eventually confessed that, in fact, that was what they were trying to do. But there's congressional inquiries. There are now a lot of really angry FBI officers looking into this. I don't think this is going to succeed in putting that story away. As John McCain loves to keep saying, you know, this thing has so many shoes yet to fall, it's a centipede. So I don't think he's going to be able to put that away. And that is really, the allegations, unproven as they are, in the suspicions in the Russia affair are so serious, I don't think even he could survive.
You know, Paul, Andrew said right off the top that, you know, the President of the United States, when something's happening around him, we should all be, you know, watching and concerned. It has an impact on everybody. In terms of Canada, you know, a Trump presidency in this kind of trouble, what impact does it have?
Well, there's an awful lot of decisions that the Canadians have been putting on hold, including, just to name one off the top of my head, the peacekeeping mission, potential peacekeeping mission in Africa, which they'd like the Americans to sign off on if they're going to go ahead with it. The Americans are not in a lot of mood or situation to be holding these kind of close consultations on these bilateral files. So a lot of things are going to remain on hold. And then there's that long story I just told about this Deputy AG, Rod Rosenstein. And the lesson was, people who think they can work closely with this president and emerge unscathed are more and more often turning out to be wrong. One of those people is Justin Trudeau. And I'm wondering at what point, he's already been recruited by people inside the White House to weigh in on internal White House disputes. That's flying awful close to the sun there, and I'm not sure he's going to escape unsinged for long.
Yeah, I mean, a weakened Trump is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it makes it harder for him to get his agenda through. So if the Trudeau government was worried that they'd have to make sweeping tax reform, you know, to that extent, tax reform is harder to get through the Congress. Similarly, they'll be not as strong on trade things. But the danger is, of course, is that somebody who's weakened lashes out, tries to create external threats, tries to create enemies, and bizarrely enough, we seem to have been one of them.
Well, and the weak president, that weak president needs wins, and those wins, I think he believes that his base doesn't really care about Russia meddling inquiry, and if he's going to try to shore up his support, he's going to be hitting at things that are pocketbook issues, and here we are, Canada's biggest trading partner, the U.S. You had a sample of it a couple of weeks ago. The danger is that as he veers into damage control mode, he turns to the easiest target, and that's us.
Let's hear from the biggest winner of the week, because there was a winner this week, not south of the border, but right here in Canada. His name's Andrew Weaver. He's the leader of the Green Party in British Columbia. Only won 3 seats, but he appears to be holding the balance of power in that province. Final count still to come. I talked to him last night. Here's what he says he cares about and wants to deal with as a result of the situation he's in right now. Watch this.
Number one issue that we've been very clear with since day one is we need to ban big money out of BC politics. The New York Times called us the Wild West. This is a deal breaker for us. We also believe firmly that our democracy is broken here in British Columbia, and we would like to see discussions about proportional representation. It's another important issue to us. Healthcare, environmental issues. There's many, many, many issues facing us in British Columbia, and that's why, you know, everything's on the table right now in the next few days as we start discussions.
So the question here is, what does the rest of Canada take from the success of the Green Party? Not the 3 seats, but also a good chunk of the share of the vote. What's the lesson as a result of that BC vote, Andrew?
Well, first of all, as with any kind of breakthrough, it shows that it can happen. Now, BC is a particular political culture, but the Greens, even by the BC standards, did better than they've ever done, 17% of the vote nearly. Secondly, of course, this is going to have potential effects in terms of if they're able to bring in electoral reform, if the Greens are successfully able to parlay their demand for that. We'll have to see, of course, on how the negotiations go. That creates a demonstration project if it happens in BC. If probably they'd have to have a referendum, but let's supposing it gets through in BC, then you've got a working model of it actually on Canadian soil, and it's harder to dismiss it as some kind of theoretical curiosity. And of course, the biggest thing perhaps for the federal government is, what does this all mean for the Trans Mountain Pipeline? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure anybody does.
Doesn't sound good. Paul.
It's extraordinary to me that Mr. Weaver, who runs a nominally Green Party, is listing environmental issues 4th on his list of desiderata as he tries to pick a government. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised. He's right that the Wild West fundraising culture in British Columbia is mind-boggling to those of us who've been following a relatively cleaner setup in Ottawa. The amount of private sector money that sloshes around those parties, principally Christy Clark's Liberal Party, is extraordinary. But I guess the other lesson I would draw is that federal Greens who are hoping to benefit or to transfer the British Columbia experience nationally need to look at the differences. Weaver was a first-time leader, fresh, new to BC voters, and he was running in a context where BC voters were trying to avoid a polarized Liberal NDP choice. They were looking around for a third option. At the federal level, Elizabeth May has won less of the popular vote every time she's gone at bat. She's now been leader of the Green Party for 11 years, and she's almost certain to be facing a very polarized electorate next time. So I wouldn't take a lot of hope if I was a federal Green looking at the BC Greens experience.
Chantal?
If I were the Ontario Liberals at Queen's Park, I'd be looking at what happens when you're asking for a 5th mandate. And I'd notice that a good economy, and that was the case in BC, did not really make the difference that Christy Clark could have hoped for. So fatigue drives people to vote in all kinds of directions. In this case, the Green Party was one of the beneficiaries. But you do see it in other major provinces. The NDP that broke the mold in Alberta. In Quebec, we have 4 parties now sitting in the National Assembly, where there used to be a 2-party system, and that's been going on for a number of years. So for an established party, and here I probably mean the NDP, I guess it's time to seriously look at how you fit in that universe and whether those smaller parties are going to prevent you from ever getting closer to power.
If I were the Greens, I'd be playing for PR first and foremost. They can probably get the campaign finance from either of the 2 big parties. Neither of them would like it, but both of them have said that they would look at reforming it. Playing for Trans Mountain, you might get them to oppose it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you stop it. I mean, the feds are pretty determined to see this go through. PR, it seems to me, is a long-term win for the Greens that's worth everything else. If they can make themselves permanent players in the British Columbia political landscape, serious players, then they have the promise of winning many more victories, legislative victories in the future that they care about. So I would be making their focus on that if I were them.
I'm not sure I buy that, and it's not because I can't see the play, but it's the time frame. This is a very fragile government, no matter what the recounts end up with. And it's not going to be around for more than 2 years. I can't see anything like that happening in that time frame. I also note that the last time British Columbians were asked about this, almost 2/3 of them opted for the current system.
Yeah,
so it's not a given that they would actually buy in to a reform over such a short time frame. I think many British Columbians would say they have possibly other priorities that they would like to be front and center.
Okay, I'm way over the limit. And you both had your say.
All right.
And we enjoyed it. Thanks, Paul, for joining us this week. Chantal in Montreal and Andrew here in Toronto.